Hi everyone, it's Rich Warner from WealthMaxBuilder.com, author of Essentials of Investing. Welcome to the video course. This is the introductory lesson, and we're going to cover a lot of ground in this course. There are 14 video lessons in all, plus some bonus videos that I've thrown in for extra guidance. First, have a look at the copyright statement and disclaimer on this page. You can pause the video if you'd like to read it. Thank you very much. I'm Rich Warner, and first of all, I'd like to thank you for purchasing this video course. It's a great way to gain some experience in a short amount of time. I'm basically distilling over 20 years of investment experience as an institutional fund manager as well as a retail investment advisor. So I've got a lot of real-world money management experience under my belt. And I've worked very hard over the years to develop competitive investment models. This course focuses on the WealthMaxBuilder passive long-term investment strategy. It is based on many years of research and development, and I think it's ideal for the individual investor. I'd like to emphasize that this video course and the ebook that I wrote, Essentials of Investing, is not a textbook per se. Rather, it's a distillation of many years of practical things that I've learned that I'm sharing with you. Consider it a practical guide or blueprint for long-term passive investing. Our mandate for this course should consist of the following key principles. Our first mandate is to preserve capital. That is, to insulate the portfolio from extremely volatile market environments. So if we get the right asset allocation mix, we should be able to reduce volatility greatly. Second, we're striving to generate income. This is great because it smoothens the equity curve and reduces some of that jaggedness in the volatility. It's also especially useful for seniors who need to live off of their retirement portfolios and liquidate it and draw it down to help pay for monthly living expenses. We should also strive to beat the rate of inflation. If we're not beating the rate of inflation, we're better off spending our money because our purchasing power is dwindling every year by 3 cents on average per dollar. So we need to hurdle at least the 3% rate and ideally more than double that in order to generate real returns with our investment strategy. Fourth, we should strive to allocate the funds optimally, not in a so-called balanced approach as many target date funds and financial advisory firms would have you believe what they consider to be a balanced mix. As you'll discover in the first chapters of this book, the prevailing wisdom as far as balanced investment portfolios is concerned is really rather off base. I find that the prevailing wisdom is actually quite unbalanced. I suggest a more conservative allocation, which we'll talk about later on. Finally, we must harness the power of compound growth, which is best achieved by long-term passive investing. We're in this for the long haul. This is not a sprint, but a marathon. And so we have to be disciplined in terms of funding our retirement portfolios along the way during earnings years in order to retire comfortably. If you start with the WealthMaxBuilder investment strategy early on in your career, say in your 20s, and you follow it for 40 plus years until your retirement, it is not unreasonable to expect your retirement portfolio to have an end value that exceeds $1.5 million. I'll show you exactly how this is done in later lessons of this course. I'd like to briefly review the benefits of sticking to a simple investment program. You know, we're not talking about killing the S&P 500 here by 14-15% or something. We're just shooting for 8% returns a year. As an example, if we have a starting equity of $25,000, let's say we're in our 20s and we have about 40 plus years to go until our retirement, and we're compounding at a growth rate of 7.5%, which is a rather conservative expectation. This is not hitting it out of the park by any means. But the importance here is sticking to the plan, sticking to the investment strategy. If you can implement a conservative asset allocation faithfully in a disciplined manner year in and year out, and there really isn't that much work to be done. It's just a matter of setting it once at the end of every year and rebalancing the portfolio. You should be set for very handsome returns over the long haul. Let's just see how valuable this power of compound growth can be. As we mentioned, 7.5% is really nothing special in the investment community. It can be achieved with a rather conservative asset allocation. But look what happens if you stick to the plan. By year 5, because of the snowball effect, the compound growth effect, growth upon growth on the original principal invested, that is, you'll see that by year 5, the compound growth effect is adding more than 1% per year in returns. If you stay with the program, look what happens in year 10 and 20. your growth rate is actually 10.6% on the original principal and 16.24% by year 20. By year 40, which takes you close to retirement age, your growth rate on the original principal is upwards of 40% per year. And that's simply because you've been sticking with the program. Think of it as a snowball that's rolling down the mountain. And as that snowball is rolling down the mountain, it is getting bigger and bigger at a faster and faster pace. So it's picking up more snow faster than ever it could at the beginning. So by the final years, your growth rate is so intense, and you only started with a small snowball at the beginning, but it's that compounding growth effect that really gives you the rewards, especially later on in years. Hence the importance of starting early. You want to start applying an investment program like WealthMaxBuilder as early as you can. As soon as you can start setting aside a percentage of your income into a Roth IRA, you would be amazed at the results. So to summarize, what we're talking about here is really a two-pronged approach, a 1-2 punch, if you will. Punch number one is a solid, conservative investment strategy. It's not overly aggressive. We're not going to the casino and betting everything on red here. This is a well thought out conservative investment allocation that should ride you through the good years as well as the bad years. Punch number two is your discipline. If you can follow this investment program starting early on, as soon as you can, and keep with it and stay with the program, you should be able to build up that snowball effect, that compound growth. If you harness that power of compounding together with a conservative investment strategy, you will meet your long-term financial goals. One of the great things about the WealthMaxBuilder long-term passive investment strategy is that it's a set it and forget it strategy. You don't have to sit in front of a computer screen every day watching the blips of the market, the pulse of the market, which only serves to create anxiety and tension and aggravation and frustration. You want to get away from all of that. As passive long-term investors, what we want to do is get the asset allocation right, and we rebalance once a year at the end of each year, and we just set it and forget it. In most cases, studies show by following such a set it and forget it approach, your results are actually even better than if you decided to be invasive and intervene and think you can time the markets and buy at the troughs and sell at the peaks. The results show that the average individual investor is not a very good market timer. So we want to get away from market timing, and instead what we want to do is get the asset allocation right, to get the balance just right. Conservative balance is preferable to an overly aggressive one. You don't have to worry about how the market is actually, the market's up 200 points, it's down 200, it's down 300, it's down 500 points in a day. That's not unheard of these days, but you know what? What you got to do with this strategy and with all passive long-term investment strategies, such as the WealthMaxBuilder program, is you just have to tune out the media. You have to shut it off, walk away and say, you know what? I've done my best and I'm following a very solid, well thought out conservative investment strategy. And just tune out all the noise and you will achieve amazing results. Here's that study that I was referring to earlier. It's called the Dalbar Study. And it showed that between 1990 and 2009, the S&P 500 averaged 8.2% per year during that period, from 1990 to 2009. But during that same period, how did individual investors do? They didn't do nearly as well as we see. The average individual investor only took less than half of what the stock market was giving. The results for fixed income aren't much better. During the same period, the Barclays Aggregate Bond Index generated total returns of 7.01% per year. Meanwhile, the average investor was only taking 1.02% from the bond market. That's not a very good record at all. In effect, if you had a portfolio that was comprised of 50% stocks and 50% bonds, or bond funds and stock funds, you would not even beat the rate of inflation with these returns. And so the question is, why do individual investors do so horribly with financial instruments, with financial markets? And you may want to juxtapose that versus real estate. It seems that the average individual investor in real estate does fairly well, whereas in the financial markets, individual investors don't do nearly as well. Why is that? I think the results have a lot to do with psychology. Individual investors think they can time the markets, that they can buy at the market bottoms, which they rarely do, and they typically buy near the market peaks. Who knows, maybe you're at a holiday dinner like Thanksgiving and you're talking with your relatives, and Aunt Mary and Uncle John are talking about how much money they made in a particular stock and how much luck they're having with the markets and everything. Well, you would be tempted to get on board. Well, come the next business day, you're going to go in there and load up on stocks, most likely, right? And that's exactly what individuals do. They tend to load up positions near the market peaks, and they sell off near the troughs, which is a horrible way to make money. And so what we need to do is we need to kill this psychological beast that we have inside of us, this itch that we have to think that we can beat the market. Instead, what we should be doing is focusing on getting a nice, conservative, solid investment allocation and riding it through thick and thin. So if individual investors are terrible at timing the market, they should either be hiring a professional fund manager to manage their finances, their retirement portfolios, or they should stick to a passive long-term investment strategy or asset allocation. What I mean by asset allocation is essentially breaking down your investment portfolio according to weightings so that you have a certain percentage allocated to stocks, whether domestic or international, small caps, large caps, what have you, or bonds, fixed income funds. You can also have an allocation to commodity sensitives, cash, REITs, that sort of thing. The only problem is the average individual investor doesn't have access to some of the best and competitive fund managers. In fact, most fund managers tend to underperform their respective benchmarks over very long time periods. Studies have shown that over very long time periods, 10 and 15 years for example, the farther out you go, the less likely it is that a fund manager can outperform a benchmark index after management fees are included. And the other problem is that the prevailing wisdom as far as so-called balanced investment portfolios are concerned and asset allocations is actually wrong. I know this because I'm very familiar with the textbooks written by some of the modern portfolio theorists, and their ideas are upheld by the investment community, by the retail financial advisory community in particular, who end up actually placing their clients in overly aggressive, stock-heavy weighted investment portfolios. I also know that prevailing wisdom is way off base when it comes to asset allocation because what they consider to be a balanced investment portfolio is actually comprised of 50 to 60% weightings in stock funds, which is way off base as far as the historical data is concerned. Some of these modern portfolio theorists include such economists and professors as Eugene Fama, William Sharpe, Harry Markowitz, IFA index advisors, for example. They all seem to uphold this stock-heavy weighting. And when you take the IFA index risk tolerance survey, you'll find that a moderate asset allocation is comprised of 50% stocks and 50% bonds, which again is an overly weighted portfolio, in my opinion, to stocks. In 2010, Financial Advisor magazine published an article about Harry Markowitz, who is a renowned Nobel Prize laureate. He's well known for his modern portfolio theory and his ideas on the efficient frontier and the trade-off between reward and risk. In 2008, Markowitz abandoned his own theory of an efficient asset allocation and preserved his own capital by selling off all his equity positions in real estate holdings and moving them to cash. So evidently, Markowitz was not acting upon his own investment principles. He turned into a market timer during 2008. I'm not trying to single out any one person here, but I'm using this case as an example. Markowitz should be commended for all the contributions that he's made to the investment industry. However, it is important to note that by selling off all his equity and real estate positions in 2008, he was conceding that perhaps his theory wasn't up to snuff, or more simply, that he had the wrong asset allocation to begin with. Well, why is it that these modern portfolio theorists get the asset allocation wrong? I would propose that the reason is that they're looking at a rosier period in investment history. They do not take into consideration the very dark years of the Great Depression. From 1928 through 1932, for example, the stock market was down by over 85% cumulatively. And it would have taken you 15, 20, 24 years to get your money back. If you choose to overlook or not include the dark ages of the Great Depression years into your backtesting, then of course you're choosing to emphasize a rosy period in the stock market when guys like Warren Buffett made a killing in the stock market. Fact of the matter is, if you include the Great Depression years and factor that into your backtesting, you come to a radically different conclusion as far as what a balanced investment allocation really looks like. It is much less weighted to stocks and much more weighted to fixed income. So that's one of the things you'll take away from this course, and I hope you keep that in mind when you continue with the lessons in this series. Now, some of these risk tolerance surveys are better than others, admittedly, and I found some fairly good risk tolerance surveys in some books as well. But the question I ask is, just how relevant are these risk tolerance surveys? Something tells me that these surveys are used as a marketing tool by financial advisors. It's a great way to sort of build the umbilical cord with their clients, sort of like for communication and sort of establishing a bond with clients, as opposed to actually arriving at what should be an optimally balanced asset allocation. In particular, some of these psychological questions that they ask the average individual investor, like, do you feel comfortable with stock market risk? Would you get anxious if the stock market gave up 50% of its gains in 1 year? Those type of questions, I think, are largely irrelevant to the overall picture. Because, what does the market really care as to whether Mr. or Mrs. Jones or Tom Smith or this or that investor have certain levels of risk, or even what their age is and their time horizon is, or how much net worth they have, or their average annual income? The point I'm trying to make here is that the markets do what they want to do day in and day out, year in and year out, and there's no way that they're going to actually stop and listen to Mr. and Mrs. Jones's risk tolerance preferences and say, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Jones they don't like a lot of volatility, so we're going to have to quiet things down here and sort of adjust to the investor. The markets don't do that. Instead, what we should be doing is have the investors adjust to the markets. So what we have to do is take a close look at market behavior and adjust to it rather than the other way around. That's why I find risk tolerance surveys to be rather superfluous in the asset allocation design process. More important questions to ask are questions such as these. If an investment loses 50% of its value, how much of a comeback do I need to get back to break even? This is a mathematical question, and it's something that we'll be talking about actually shortly in the course. Another question is, can the average investor afford to wait almost 50 years to recoup his money? That's time horizon related, and that's actually a more relevant question to ask than something like, how do you feel about market risk? What does your time horizon look like? This is a more important quantitative type of question that needs to be asked. Another question to ask is, if we're trying to build financial wealth here, why not consider real estate instead of an investment strategy, such as WealthMaxBuilder? Well, I'd like to briefly review the pros and cons of real estate, because this will actually help you understand why we even bother designing investment portfolios and building wealth over time in a retirement account. Some of the pros for real estate are, if you take out a mortgage to buy a home, you're actually setting yourself for a forced savings plan. Having to pay that mortgage every month is going to force you to actually build up wealth over time. And that over time, as you pay off the loan, you're actually building up equity. Additionally, if you talk to any family, there's no place like home. And it's a great way to solidify the bonds inside of a family. No doubt about that. And there are tax advantages. You can deduct the interest payments on a mortgage on your 1040, on your tax returns. There are also tax breaks on the capital gains of real estate for first home buyers. Another nice thing about real estate is that you don't get monthly statements in the mail that can potentially give you a panic attack if the market is down. But in fact, real estate does go up and down in price. It's just that you're not trying to sell your house, every month like you are getting statements in the mail from your brokerage accounts. Then there's this long-term appreciation concept, similar to stocks. Real estate, in fact, will go higher over very long periods of time, assuming that there's always going to be population growth in the country. That much is true, and these are the main advantages of owning real estate. But let's take a look at some of the cons. Real estate is probably the biggest ticket item that you'll ever purchase during your lifetime. It's much bigger than buying a car or furniture, and a lot of people find it hard to put money together for a down payment on a mortgage, for example, let alone to buy the real estate 100% cash. Another major con with real estate is that it really requires household stability. And by that, I mean emotional, situational, and financial stability. You have to be pretty much happy with the location that you're choosing, the neighborhood, and it's near a school maybe, or maybe it's not near a school. And you have to be pretty happy with the location in order to plunk down money and invest in a home for 10 to 15, 20 years. And then, of course, you have to be financially fit to pay off the mortgage or to buy the home to begin with. You have to have a solid employment history. Perhaps there are 2 breadwinners in the family, and that all helps and contributes to the financial stability. And you should not have excessive debt outstanding on credit cards, for example, or other auto loans or things like that that are going to really burden your ability to pay down a mortgage. So we're talking about emotional, situational, and financial fitness in order to make that big decision to buy a home in the first place. Another major con with real estate is that there's really no power of compound growth that's going to help you build wealth over time. It's really just a matter of supply and demand in the end. Does somebody want to pay that much more for this home than I purchased it when I bought it, 10, 15 years ago? One of the major cons of real estate is that it's very illiquid. If you need to pay off a huge medical expense, for example, or if you lost your job and can no longer pay the mortgage, how quickly can you raise cash to help pay for these emergency situations? Chances are you won't be able to sell your home inside of 3 weeks, 4 weeks. It takes a long time to get that house on the market, to show the house, to get the listing brokers and all of that. Unless, of course, you decide to dump the house for like a huge discount price, which obviously is not something you would want to do. Then there are lots of repairs and maintenance issues. Especially older homes have huge repair costs and maintenance costs. Pretty soon you're going to need to rewire the electrical system. You need a new roof. Landscaping, all sorts of things come to the fore. Then there's property taxes. Depending on where you live, property taxes can really eat into your overall returns on real estate. In order to be a real estate investor, you really need a very long time horizon. Don't expect to flip real estate like you can flip a stock on the NYSE or a NASDAQ. You need at least a 10 to 15 year horizon if you're an investor in real estate. We're talking about your primary residence. Now, whether or not you want to go into rental income and buy secondary homes and such, that's another story. But even then, you're not going to want to flip your rental properties. So you really need to think long term when it comes to real estate. And finally, if you're buying real estate with a mortgage, you're going to leverage your returns. That means that, let's say, $30,000 down, you're going to have 4 or 5 times the buying power of that down payment principal, and that actually just magnifies the returns as well as the downside risk. There are countless investors who lost their shirts in 2008 during the meltdown years in real estate because they were flipping condos in Miami and Las Vegas, for example. It was not unheard of to hear of investors losing 75%, 100%, 150% of their principal by buying condos at extreme prices in 2006. So I'm not saying that we should avoid real estate necessarily, but I think that a good solution or something to strive for would be to go with something like this, where you try to invest in both. If you can afford to pay off a mortgage and at the same time set aside 10% of your gross income per month into a Roth IRA, you're really doing a fantastic job in this case. You've got the returns from real estate over the long haul and a nice home to live in. But at the same time, you're socking away 10% every month, and over 40 plus years, you may end up contributing $260,000, $270,000, $280,000 into a Roth IRA. But the end value, due to the compounding and the growth effect, is going to be upwards of $1 million, $1.2 million, $1.5 million. So you're going to be really in great shape if you can follow both of these programs. I'm not saying that you shouldn't invest in real estate, but you should have a really good look at setting up something like the WealthMaxBuilder investment portfolio inside of a Roth IRA. And that's it for the introductory lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, you can contact me at the email address noted here. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in lesson 1.